following is a special presentation of the HBO sports documentary series, Legends and Legacies.
In the history of man, there's no other profession except slavery where one man is tied to one owner for the rest of his life. In slavery, they just shift you from one plantation to the other. In baseball, they do the same thing. They shift you from one franchise to the other, depending upon the whims of 24 millionaires. You say, all right, Curt Flood, you're making money. You make $100,000 a year. Well, that's not the point. The point is, I don't want anybody to own me. That belongs to me.
Curt came up to the office and we went out for lunch. Marvin and I were very curious to determine why he was really thinking about this.
I said, you're one of the outstanding players in baseball today, but a case like this could take years. I wanted to make sure that Curt understood that this was A, no simple matter, B, that it was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot, in my opinion.
It was at the time an outlandish notion that a ball player should have the right to choose the team for which he played. But at New York's Summit Hotel on November 24, 1969, Curt Flood seemed hell-bent on doing something outlandish to earn that very right.
All the questions that were asked were to determine whether Curt was the Jackie Robinson on this issue.
I said to him, if the 1,000,000-to-1 shot came home and you won it, you're never going to collect any damages. Curt thought about that for a minute and he said, still, if we won, it would benefit all the other players. I said, yeah. And the players to come. I said, yeah. He said, that's good enough for me.
When the 31-year-old Flood left lunch that day, his mind had been made up. He was going to sue the game of baseball. Consequences be damned.
Boy, something is gonna happen to this man here. He ain't never gonna play no more.
The establishment in baseball, boy, they're just as through with me as they can possibly be, and I know it.
You'll never really be able to tell why. I still don't see where it really came from, because if you ask me before, would Curt Flood be the kind of guy to sue baseball, I'd say no. Until that point, I didn't know that Curt really had that type of thing in him.
If that fateful decision by Curtis Charles Flood remains a mystery to some, its origins perhaps could be traced as far back as 1915 and a small town in Louisiana, where a young woman decided one day she'd simply had enough of the way things were.
She was out shopping in an expensive store, and this Caucasian woman came up to her and said, "Can you tell me where I can find me a nigger bitch to clean my house?" Curt's mom said, "I don't know any nigger bitches to clean your house." And the woman slapped her. She slapped her back.
So naturally, the fight began, and Mother had to leave there because they were going to lynch her.
Laura Ricks fled the segregated South, eventually landing in relatively tolerant Oakland, California. There, She settled down with her second husband, Herman Flood, and raised 6 children. Curt was the baby.
She was busy with all of them, but Curt was special. You could kind of tell she had a fondness for him.
Curt learned as a grown man that he was poor. But as a kid, he didn't know he was poor. His mother had sheltered them in this ghetto in Oakland to make them not feel deprived or put up on.
Mother was always seeing that we had music lessons. And Herman Sr. painted. He also played music.
Curt's dad had worked with his dad in a traveling music group, so the family was very, very musical.
But young Curt was drawn to more traditional boyhood pursuits.
A lot of times we would be doing family things, but we had to drop Curt off with the Little League team. He wanted to play baseball.
He was usually playing ball with his older brother, Carl, who was a phenomenal athlete and who Curt idolized as a kid.
Carl was a different cut. Carl was more cunning, more cutting, and he would fight. Carl got in trouble with the law and everything.
He got sent down to one of those juvenile places. And of course, that really broke Curt's heart.
By the time he was 18, Carl Flood had been arrested nearly a dozen times. Little brother Curt, meanwhile, was making a very different impression on folks in West Oakland.
What stuck out about Curt was his being curious about things. He was a bright candle, and he made sure you knew he was there.
At 14 or 15, I would have been surprised if he didn't get to the big leagues. He had that much ability.
He'd make great catches that looked normal. As soon as he heard a crack in the bat, he knew where the ball was going to go. He turned his back and he ran and turned around and made it look easy.
Soon after finishing high school in 1956, Curt Flood was signed by the Cincinnati Reds. Just 18, he was on his way to the majors. First stop, spring training in Tampa, Florida.
It was his first time he'd been on a plane, and he's so excited.
He had this brochure they had sent to all their prospects of this beautiful hotel in Tampa called the Floridian. Curt hails a cab and says, "Take me to the Floridian."
He was thinking, I'm gonna meet the other guys and I can have lunch and I'll be in a big hotel. So he gets to the hotel and he presents himself. The guy stops him and he says, "You with the minor league team?" And Curt said, "Yeah." Porter took his stuff, took him out the back door of the hotel, flagged down a colored taxi.
And they send him to the black section of town where all of the Reds' black talent is staying. He realized that he was in a completely different world.
From the time someone made me stay in the colored section when the white kids stayed on the beach, I felt like a nigger.
In one of the minor league towns, Curt could not dress with his teammates.
He had to dress in this steel corrugated lean-to on the outside of the clubhouse.
And one day, when he went to have his uniform cleaned between games of a doubleheader, Flood discovered just how cruel Jim Crow could be.
He can see that the guys are taking their uniforms off and throwing them into this pile on the floor. So he takes his uniform off, and then all of a sudden he hears this yell. The clubhouse guy is just cursing, and he runs and he gets a long stick with a nail in it, and he picks Curt's uniform out of the pile of uniforms, and they take it to the black cleaners. He sat there and started crying, and he was naked, and it was hot, and the guys inside were just chit-chatting and having a great old time.
I think it is something that he could never forget. When you lose your dignity, you lose an awful lot. How do you now regain that?
It wasn't something that you talked about. If you were going to make it to the major league, you just had to, buck up.
But even after Flood was traded to St. Louis in 1958 and made the major league club, he quickly learned, courtesy of his manager Sally Hemus, that life in the big leagues brought its own brand of racial injustice.
You're not only being denied the opportunity to play, but you're told that you don't have the ability to play. Sally told him that he should probably quit baseball and try something else. He told me the same thing. It didn't affect him nearly as much as it did me. At least he wasn't as vocal as I was.
He was very, very quiet. You could see the mind working. You could almost see the stomach churning and hear it churning.
And if Flood's rage was silent, its roots could be found in the path blazed by an icon from a not-so-distant age.
Jackie Robinson was his Superman, his God. He was his hero, his absolute hero.
He emulated him by wearing Jackie's number. He would be influenced by anything that Jackie was doing.
So in 1962, when Robinson invited a group of black athletes to a rally in Mississippi and asked Flood to come along, Flood rushed to stand by his idol's side.
I want you to pay tribute to three wonderful fellows.
For Jackie to invite him and do anything with him, that fell right into things because now Curt is in that same arena.
My baseball career is just starting. Many of you, I'm sure, have never heard about me, but this career with the NAACP is just starting as well. If you don't hear about me in one, I'm certain you will hear about me in the other, because I'm really sincere about our civil rights.
I was in Mississippi and just happened to bump into Curt. I didn't think he should be down there because he could get hurt.
I don't think he knew the enormity of what he was doing. Their host is Medgar Evers. A year later, Medgar Evers is shot in the back and killed.
I talked to several people here, and they were saying how grateful they were to me for coming down here to do this for you. Well, that's not the truth. I came down here because of myself and my children, because they are certainly affected by it, just as yours are. If there's anything that I can ever do as far as this fight for freedom is concerned, certainly count on me. Thank you very much.
Curt Flood had found his political voice. While back in St. Louis with a new manager, he was finding his professional footing too, starting in center field for the 1964 world champion Cardinals. Away from the field, with a young wife, 4 small kids, and another on the way, Flood was also the picture of personal success. But when he sought to move his family out to the Bay Area suburbs just weeks after the '64 World Series, the leaser, upon learning his new tenants were black, threatened to hold the house hostage at gunpoint. And the fight for freedom which Flood had spoken of in Mississippi was suddenly at his doorstep.
Of all places where you would think it would be most welcome, World Series hero, and still your blackness was something that you had to deal with.
They filed for a preliminary injunction, a court order, armed police protection. They searched the entire house for bombs and moved Curt and his family into that home, television cameras rolling the entire time.
There's a great deal of pride involved here. How can they do this? Not because I'm a professional athlete or because I'm a Negro even, but I am a human being, regardless of what I am. I think that if I can afford this place, I think that I certainly ought to have it.
The easiest thing for Curt to do in that Alamo experience was to rent another house. But he took on this racist with a shotgun through the court system. And he was vindicated by the court system.
What good do you think could come out of this?
Well, I think that the notoriety that's undoubtedly going to be involved here will make people aware, if nothing else, that prejudice is not only confined to the southern part of our United States, and if they move their mustache and look under their nose, that they find it right here at home, too.
Alamo was a horrific experience for us as children. to be confronted with racism at 3 years old, you know, it's scary.
And the trauma deepened for the Flood kids when their parents split just months after moving in, and their father moved away for good.
The fact that they were separated wasn't different than they were separated while he was working. Dad was always gone, and I missed him. I missed him most all of my life.
Batting second and playing center field, number 21, Curt Flood.
Curt loved the game. I think the ballpark is where he really thrived.
Curt Flood was a hell of a ball player.
There they drive in a deep right. Flood playing it beautifully.
He was very well known for climbing the walls and catching balls.
Watching him catching the ball was like watching pretty girls go by. The next one was better than the last one.
He made a play at Wrigley Field once in the Vines that I'll never forget, and everybody was just dumbfounded that a man could do that as gracefully as Curt did.
In a National League stocked with some of the best outfielders in baseball history, Flood, all 5'9" of him, stood as tall as any. A perennial Gold Glove recipient, Flood once went an entire season without making a single error.
Curt Flood was an extraordinary overachiever. He must have had extraordinary inner drive, but it was all personal, and it was all ambition.
Here's Curt Flood, the premier defensive center fielder in the National League.
He was a pesky little guy. You know what I mean? He was a guy that, I call him gnats, that put their bat on the ball all the time. That's what Curt was.
Curt Flood, the most consistent hitter for the Cardinals all year.
He was a guy that you could depend on day in and day out. And you were always going to get a top flight job, just doing things to help the ball club.
On the field, there was no more reliable cog in the Cardinal machine. But off of it, there was no individual more distinct.
Curt was a Renaissance man before the term Renaissance man was coined.
Curt could play a piano.
He went to spring training. He came with a ukulele and pretty much taught himself. If we'd had a couple of hula girls out there, he could have played a song or two for them.
If there was any game that took coordination, he would do it. And then he'd put it down and say, "Got anything else you want me to do?" He was gifted. That's the word, gifted.
The first thing I learned as a teenager that made me think of him being very different was that he was an artist. I had never heard of an athlete being an artist before.
We always had a sketch pad in the clubhouse, and if somebody had their kids in there, he'd be sketching their kids or something, and then give them the sketch, which was a nice thing.
In 1967, Flood traded his pencil for a paintbrush and opened Curt Flood Associates, a studio that did photography work and featured Flood's paintings. Soon, his commissioned work began popping up all over St. Louis, while a portrait he did of Martin Luther King brought him national acclaim.
Flood is an interesting fellow. He's quite a portrait painter.
So prolific was Flood as a portrait artist, teammates took to calling him Rembrandt.
He had volunteered, "Joe, anytime you want me to do something."
He asked me, "Do you have a picture of your kids?" I said, "Well, I got a picture of me and my two girls." He said, "Well, could you let me use it?" And then he painted that.
He painted a picture of my son and daughter. It was beautiful. It was like, how could he do that? Because all he had was a photo, right?
Painted Gussie's picture and presented it to him down in spring training. And Gussie got a little bit choked up at the time.
There was no better way for for Curt to ingratiate himself with the owner of the Cardinals. Bush loved this portrait. And this is just one reason, in addition to his amazing catches, why he really was Gussie Bush's favorite.
Flood was a St. Louis treasure, and in the late 60s, his profile only heightened when he began dating a movie star, a young beauty named Judy Pace.
When we would go into places, especially within the African American community, there would be a little chaos, and he loved it.
If the start of his baseball career had been stained by injustice, Flood found his prime painted by the perks of success.
Curt had a magnificent penthouse. He always had a Cadillac and a closet full of clothes and jewelry and artwork in the apartment.
He did live well. He enjoyed life as much as he could.
Footloose and fancy-free. That's the way Curt seemed to me, a free spirit.
I was not the only person that Curt was dating. He had different girlfriends.
He lived the life of a ball player who's young, single, and the women adore.
If that weren't enough, Flood also happened to play for one of the best teams in baseball. After winning their second World Series in 4 years in 1967, the Cardinals, behind the Cy Young Award-winning season of Flood's roommate Bob Gibson, reached the Fall Classic again in 1968. And in the deciding Game 7 against the Detroit Tigers, Gibson was on the mound seeking his third victory of the series. With 2 on and 2 out in the 7th inning, the score was tied at 0 when Detroit's Jim Northrup stepped to the plate.
Northrup hits the ball to all fields.
Northrup hit a line drive to center field. Well-hit line drive.
Fly ball, Flood. Hey, almost got it. He misjudges it over his head. 2 runs are going to score. The same thing almost happened earlier in the game to Jim Northrup, and now it has happened to one of the greatest defensive center fielders in baseball, Curt Flood.
First of all, I didn't see the ball. The background here is not very good. I didn't think the ball was hit as well as it was. And then when I realized it, I tried to reverse my feel, and I slipped.
He got stuck in the mud. The rain the night before was torrential, and center field was muddy. He took that one step in, and he couldn't recover.
There was just circumstances, you know. Shit happens.
Do you think you could have made the play on the ball if you picked it up right off his bat?
Well, I don't know. We were just talking about that, and I really don't think so.
You're coming back next year.
Of course we are. We'll see you the same time right here next year.
But Flood's public nonchalance belied a private agony.
He was devastated.
Northrup.
And it was like it was on a loop. He would just keep replaying and replaying and replaying. And he would just wanted to stop. He felt like he let everybody down.
Our society has a way of blaming people. And Curt was the guy who was blamed for this, and I've always thought it was ludicrous and unfair.
That error started the whole dismantling of the life that he had, the life he had worked so hard for.
Curt smoked. And I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, smelling smoke, and he was sitting on the side of the bed smoking, one cigarette after another. He'd never say what was bothering him, but he'd sit there and smoke cigarettes all night. Is that a person with something on their mind? Absolutely. What is it? I don't know.
As great as he was on the ball field, he was a horrific businessman. His finances were a mess.
He was a guy who was more preoccupied with getting dressed to go out than getting his bills paid or doing the minutia of being alive in the United States. That was not his forte.
Flood was making more than just about anyone in St. Louis. But he was spending more too. And after the '68 season, he had stopped paying alimony and child support. And when his ex-wife filed for more money at the start of 1969, Flood found himself in no position to pay. So he looked to the Cardinal family for relief.
Curt wants $100,000. And he says, I'm not coming to spring training until I get that $100,000 contract. To hold out on Gussie Busch after dropping the fly ball really annoyed Gussie Busch. I think it more than annoyed Gussie Busch.
Busch gave his center fielder a raise. But just a few weeks later, another dose of Flood family drama deepened the rift between the owner and his favorite player.
Curt's brother was there at that time because Curt had brought him from Los Angeles after he was let out of jail to try to help straighten him out. He gave him a job in the photography studio, and Carl was doing a pretty good job, he thought.
Carl is just sort of a tornado plowing through that mix. He's got a heroin addiction. He's just a bad guy.
Curt gets a call from Mr. Busch, and he hears this voice just yelling at him. You brought Carl here. He's embarrassed the whole team. He's on the news.
He held up a jewelry store in St. Louis, and virtually the entire incident was captured on tape. They commandeered an empty police car to try to make their getaway. I think they got a total of 2 blocks away before they were apprehended. It was not well conceived, it was not well carried out, and it ended in disaster. Curt was heartbroken. He couldn't have been any more upset than he was.
But he was upset that Mr. Busch was blaming him for his brother robbing the jewelry store. That was the nail.
I rode to the ballpark with him every day. And one day, his parking place wasn't there. The bat order, usually when you order bats, lickety split. Them bats are there. And all of a sudden, Curt didn't have his bats.
His life is starting to fray.
He said, they're gonna get rid of me. I said, no, they can't get rid of you. He would say that just about every other night. He said, they're gonna get rid of me.
The articles in the newspapers were very, very powerful. Even Harry Carey was saying, oh, wouldn't it be great to see Dick Allen in this lineup? What? Where'd that come from?
They were only rumors, but Flood's response to them was absolute.
He says, I'm not going. I don't care where it is, I'm not going.
Curt gets a phone call from someone in the Cardinals front office who he describes as a middle echelon coffee drinker. Curt, you've been traded to the Phillies, you and McCarver. I'm very sorry, and hangs up.
The morning after, Curt was in my office. I had never seen him so upset about anything at any time.
After 12 years, 7 Gold Gloves, and 2 World Series titles, Flood had been told his services were no longer needed.
He thought it was a complete slap in the face that general manager Bing Devine didn't call him up and say, look, we're sorry we had to do this.
Now, all of the stuff that he was doing in St. Louis was for nothing.
What hit him immediately was, these people are telling me I have to go someplace I don't want to go, and I had nothing to do with it.
It was very obvious to him how it was going to change his life. He was clearly in my office because he was looking for what he could do about it.
But his options were scant. Flood, like every other big leaguer, had signed the uniform players contract, which contained paragraph 10A, better known as the reserve clause. The reserve clause bound ball players to their respective teams. In effect, they were owned by them, in perpetuity.
You were their property. They could do whatever they want with you.
I mean, you were traded just like cattle or pigs or hogs or anything.
Or sold for cash. Literally, sold for cash. The one difference between outright slavery and what you found is that a ball player could quit. Of course, if he did, he could not play professional baseball anywhere.
There was perhaps no man on earth more determined to change the reserve system than Marvin Miller. After 15 years with the United Steelworkers Union, Miller had taken charge of the Baseball Players Association in 1966, eager to set free the game's proletariat. There was just one problem: baseball's intractable ruling class.
The owners were almost feudal in terms of the way they thought of their employees. This was a group of employers who had operated for well over a century and never had to deal with a union.
And if the owners were all-powerful lords, many of the players, it turned out, were all too willing indentured servants.
The owners made us think that we were privileged. I mean, where could we have gotten a job making $60,000 a year in the late 60s? It was unheard of.
Marvin Miller's whole task was to get the players to stop accepting paternalism as some kind of natural order of things.
There was at least one player, though, who needed no lecture on the indignity of the reserve system.
Curt hated that. I'm nobody's property. Well, you belong to them.
Not many players in those early years wanted to talk about the legalities of the reserve clause.
Well, he would ask the basic question, what do you think would happen if it was tested?
It was only later that I realized Curt had been involved in civil rights demonstrations, and his questioning the legal basis for a particular thing was not unusual for him.
But when Miller heard from Flood soon after his trade to the Phillies in the fall of 1969, he was hardly expecting the seed of a revolution.
When he telephoned, he said, "You know I've been traded." I said, "Yes, I know." And he said, "I've been to see my personal lawyer here in St. Louis." I perked up, what does that mean? We're going to pursue the possibility of an antitrust lawsuit, and we'd like to come to New York and talk to you.
You will never have another job in baseball again, ever. You understand that, don't you, Curt?
It almost didn't matter what I said. I realized that this is really a man of principle here.
After Marvin spent most of the time trying to convince him what a mistake he was making personally, concluded it by saying, "You're the answer to a maiden's prayer. You're the guy I've been looking for."
Miller immediately formulated a plan of attack, which began with sending Flood to the union's annual meeting in Puerto Rico. There, he informed the player representatives of his plan to sue baseball.
The overwhelming sentiment in the room was skepticism.
I think players were much more suspicious than even we were about Curt's motives.
I asked him, why are you doing this? You're right in your prime years. This cannot be good.
Tom Haller was very forceful with his questions about race. Is this being done for your... Curt said no. It's being done to help me and to help you.
He was so good at describing what he thought was wrong and why it's important that we do something about it.
Having assured the player reps he'd see his lawsuit through to the end, Flood won the union's financial backing, but he left Puerto Rico as he had come, an army of one.
Sadly, what came out of that meeting was, even though the expenses were going to be paid by the association, I think Curt realized that he was isolated. And I think he felt that isolation.
I said, "You're crazy. You'll never win that." Was I behind Curt? Absolutely, but I was about 10 steps back, just in case there was some fallout.
He regarded it not so much as an antitrust case, which is what it was, technically, but he regarded it as a civil rights case, and that's what it really was.
When you hear what I've got to say.
It's been a master and slave relationship. As long as you do what I say do, you're fine.
He was not particularly identified with being an activist athlete in the same way that Jim Brown or Bill Russell or Muhammad Ali were. There was no indication that he would do something like this.
But fueled by his own personal history, not to mention the turbulent times, Curt Flood was now determined to be heard, and heard loud and clear.
I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about freedom, yeah.
Do you think your race has something to do with your taking this strong a stand?
Well, yes, I do. Me as a black man, I'm probably a lot more sensitive to the rights of other people because I have been denied these rights.
I'm not sure how political Flood wanted it to be, but the moment and the language that he used made it an intensely political struggle.
Freedom to do as I choose to do.
It's been written, Curt, that you're a man who makes $90,000 a year, which isn't exactly slave wages. What's your retort to that?
Well, Howard, a well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave.
That slave analogy pissed off a lot of people. Curt was making 7 times what the average American was making. The thought that someone like that could be a victim of injustice didn't resonate with people.
The Civil Rights Act has been passed, the Voting Rights Act has been passed. By 1968, there's an anti-poverty program. So there's a kind of backlash that's coming from whites. Now you got black people coming out there making irrational statements that I'm making $90,000 a year and I'm a slave.
Most of the sports writers were in the pockets of the ball clubs. This was not a liberal baseball press.
The vast majority of them thought that he was trying to destroy the national pastime.
Somebody's used to getting admiration and fan mail that now turned into this pile of vicious, angry, mocking hate.
Flood even began catching flack from some of the very men whose rights he was supposedly fighting for.
You have outspoken critics like Killebrew and Yastrzemski, but then you have the silence from black players like Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Frank Robinson.
I think they were making money, and if they said something against the establishment, it might have hurt their position.
You seem to think that there are things more important than money, obviously.
I pride myself for several things, of which one is integrity. Me as a human being, I must stand up for that principle alone. What I really want out of this thing is to give every ball player the chance to be a human being and to take advantage of the fact that we live in a free and democratic society, and he should have some choice.
I was living in a world where if your boss decided you were going to Athens or Denver, that's where you were going. You had only one option, which was to quit. I always thought that what he did was bigger than the fact that he was a famous athlete or that he was black or any of that. I also thought they're going to crush him. They got a lot at stake here, and he doesn't have a chance.
The owner's great propaganda was if you didn't have a reserve system, the wealthiest clubs would get all the best players.
I think they thought there'd be chaos. They thought competitive balance would go to hell in a handbasket, and the game would be changed a great deal.
The stakes then couldn't have been higher for baseball's owners, and the man they'd entrusted to protect their interests. The main defendant in the case, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn.
He was recruited by the owners. He was paid by the owners. Whatever authority he seemed to have was only because they ceded it to him.
The best interests of baseball, that was his mantra. I think he felt that he had to present himself as a figure of moral rectitude.
But when Flood, before filing suit, had appealed for his freedom to Kuhn on moral grounds, the commissioner's response made clear that the great American game followed its own moral compass.
He understood what Curt Flood was saying, but those sorts of comments about the reserve system were not new. Baseball's antitrust exemption has been subjected to the scrutiny by the courts before.
Baseball's antitrust exemption, which enabled the owners' monopoly over their players, had been established in a Supreme Court decision way back in 1922, when Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes ruled that baseball was not interstate commerce and therefore not subject to antitrust laws. 3 decades later, when a disgruntled Yankee farmhand named George Toulson challenged the reserve clause in hopes of making the majors with a new team, the court upheld Holmes's earlier ruling, tightening the owners' grip on their players. Which meant that in 1970, Curt Flood wasn't just challenging the national pastime, he was taking on the most powerful legal body in the land.
They're up against 2 Supreme Court precedents that say baseball cannot be sued for its monopolistic practices, right? It's the only professional sport that has an exemption from the antitrust laws.
And you say to yourself, you're a dreamer. You're not going to get caught a change.
But Miller had a legal ace up his sleeve, one familiar with the inner workings of the court. Former Secretary of Labor and former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg, who took Flood's case pro bono.
Arthur Goldberg for free? That's like having Frank Sinatra sing at your daughter's wedding for nothing.
And he was a former Supreme Court justice. He's the perfect guy.
The notion that an ex-Supreme Court justice would be back arguing the case before the Supreme Court, that's very, very rare. And it struck us as being very problematic for us.
Before it could get to the Supreme Court, however, the case would begin with a federal court trial in New York City. And when Flood versus Kuhn kicked off a month and a half into the 1970 baseball season, Goldberg appeared eager for battle.
I can't keep the judge waiting.
But Flood, who was sitting out the 70 season, entered his new arena saddled with uncertainty as he prepared to testify on the trial's first day.
He's an athlete. He's not supposed to be sitting in a courtroom in springtime. He's supposed to be playing baseball.
He never had been a witness in a court trial before. And he was nervous and somewhat flustered.
And the presiding judge, Irving Ben Cooper, did little to put him at ease.
Cooper's behavior toward Flood was outrageous. He would make side remarks. Being a witness in a federal court is not as easy as catching a ball in center field, is it, Mr. Flood?
He did not come off as a good witness.
Mr. Goldberg, what happened in court today?
What happened in court? Gentlemen, we're trying a lawsuit. The place to try a lawsuit is in court.
You can't discuss...
No, we cannot.
After day one, the issue wasn't Curt Flood and his personal plight anymore. It was technical labor relations, antitrust sort of stuff. I won't say he was totally irrelevant, but he was certainly marginalized.
And as the 6-week trial wore on, even more isolated from his peers.
One of the disappointments was that not a single ball player showed up.
He said if they had been walking down those stairs in unity, it might have changed some of the news or the way they could report the news. That was one of his feelings.
The players could have been there in the early afternoon or the morning, but I wasn't going to urge anybody to do it.
I wouldn't have showed up. No.
I didn't think much about it, unfortunately.
I guess it would have been support, but I was concerned about me and my family and making a living, and I didn't want to be in the middle of that at all.
What little support Flood did get came from baseball mavericks like former owner Bill Veeck, Jewish baseball great Hank Greenberg, and his idol, Jackie Robinson, all of whom testified on his behalf.
When Robinson came into court, Curt was deliriously happy.
When he stops at Curt's chair and whispers in his ear, "Keep your head up, you're doing the right thing," tears started to well up in Flood's eyes. At that moment, Curt knew he was doing the right thing.
He looked at Robinson's life and thought, it can be done. Well, it was done by Robinson, but it couldn't be done by Flood. He was throwing himself against the wall.
As time went on, I think something not good happened from a mental standpoint in terms of what Curt had gotten himself into.
If reality was setting in, so too were the consequences of the $110,000 contract he'd passed up in rejecting the trade to Philadelphia.
His ex-wife Beverly files another lawsuit seeking back alimony and child support. And his creditors in St. Louis are suing him for debts owed for his photography business.
His income had stopped. It wasn't a question of, I've got the money, I'm not going to pay you. It was a question of, I don't have any income, I've used up my savings.
He had problems of all kinds. And he had to have a worry about his drinking as well. We would go out to lunch, and he was both drinking and smoking more heavily than I ever saw him do. There were times when he had tremors of his hand.
I say, maybe you might want to pull back a little. But that meant nothing.
Alcohol may have offered Flood an escape during the trial. But once testimony ended, he chose a more traditional means.
He flees to Denmark.
That, to me, is Curt. Got some big problems here. Okay, fine. Hell with it. See you later. I'll be back.
I didn't know where my father was. All we knew as his children is he was not available.
After the 1968 season, he traveled around the world and he fell in love with Denmark.
He had a lovely space right on a lake. A lot of people just knew him as Curt, the guy who always had a sketch pad in his hands. When I was there, he was like the old Curt. He was relaxed and just being his jovial self. But he knew at that point that was not going to be a reality.
Back in New York, Flood's initial appeal to become a free agent had been denied. But it was circling creditors and the IRS that would spoil his Danish paradise and leave Flood needing a rescue from his escape. The game he was suing offered an unexpected one.
He gets a phone call from a Washington Post reporter who said that Curt's been traded to the Washington Senators.
His first reaction was, is this going to harm the case? I told the guys I was in it to the end. He needed the money, and he wanted to play.
In other news today, baseball's holdout player Curt Flood signed a contract with the Washington Senators. The contract reportedly puts Flood's salary over $100,000, and it contains the controversial reserve clause that Flood has been attacking in the courts.
I haven't really changed my philosophy about the whole thing, but sometimes you have to do things that aren't tasteful. This is the only way I can play baseball.
He came back for a paycheck. He did not come back because he wanted to go to one of baseball's worst franchises.
I'm more than sure that I can come back. A year layoff is not a lot of time.
But when he suited up for the '71 season, it quickly became clear that a year in Flood's case had been an eternity.
To see him during the first half of spring training, you would say, well, this guy, there's no way he could have ever played in the majors.
Flood had been drinking, womanizing, The Senators trainer said that Curt had the oldest 33-year-old body he had ever seen.
I think he thought, sure, I'm rusty, sure, this is going to take time.
But the skills were gone. And I think that was because he couldn't concentrate on baseball.
It's in the Court of Appeals, and the only place we'll ever get any justice, I think, will be in the Supreme Court. Right now, I'm not going to worry about it. I've got enough troubles playing center field.
He really did not like talking about the case, and it's the news media's first chance to get at him, and he can't get away from them. Not being able to perform on the field, he'd go back to the room and he'd start drinking. And then the next day, after having drank all night, go to the ballpark, eyes all red, and the same thing would happen.
I mean, he would always call and say what was going on in spring training and come on out and that kind of thing, but there was almost like a silence.
Behind the scenes, Curt was dealing with a lot of demons. He was receiving all this hate mail, tons of hate mail. He probably received 4 or 5 assassination threats a day. In almost every letter, he was being called some type of a nigger. And he would tell me, I'm doing the same thing any man would do, black or white.
When the regular season finally arrived, Flood's skills were still missing in action. Hitting an anemic 150 after a week of play, he was benched by manager Ted Williams.
Never in my wildest dream did I think that he would fail at coming back. I really thought he'd be fine. It's just that he quit. He quit.
Being in his company, you were accepting some of the weight of the world, because it was right there.
On April 27th, 18 games into the 71 season, the Senators arrived at RFK Stadium for a game against the Minnesota Twins. Their high-priced center fielder was nowhere to be found.
He's not there. I'm worried. I kept thinking, I hope he didn't do something crazy. We're told to come into the clubhouse, and we're read the telegram that he had sent.
Vanished. Just poof, gone.
I had no idea where he was. After maybe 3 weeks, he called me. First words out of his mouth were, I'm not coming back. Basically, he told me that I should move on. It was as if he had had a life here and it didn't exist anymore, and he just was not going to be here anymore.
The hate mail and evaporation of his skills weren't all that had triggered Flood's disappearance. 2 days before he had vanished, his ex-wife had filed yet another lawsuit seeking money she was owed. Money Curt Flood, despite his 6-figure contract, did not have.
Flood could have played another 5 to 10 years and not paid all of his debts. His advice from his attorney, Alan Zerman, was to declare bankruptcy, but that would have come at an enormous cost.
Filing bankruptcy would have given the bankruptcy trustee the power to resolve all litigation, which would have included the baseball case. Curt's choice not to do that says to me, I'm not going to settle this case. Not to make all my financial problems go away. I gave my word, I'm going to see it through, and he did.
The Supreme Court agreed today to hear arguments that professional baseball is a business which must be subject to the antitrust laws. The court will hear the case of Curt Flood, former center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals, who says the present system makes baseball players slaves.
Flood may have been lost at sea, but 11 months after his disappearance, Flood versus Kuhn finally reached its intended destination, the United States Supreme Court, which meant that Flood's lawyer, Arthur Goldberg, was set to take a turn in one of his favorite places, the center of the spotlight.
He was one of the vainest men I've ever met. The reason he argued the case is Arthur Goldberg wanted to be back on top and wanted people kowtowing to him.
Goldberg had left the Supreme Court in 1965, believing that as UN ambassador, he'd be able to negotiate peace in Vietnam. He resigned in frustration after 3 years, and some felt had been trying to make his way back to the court ever since. On March 20th, 1972, Goldberg finally returned, with a chance to argue down baseball's antitrust exemption and bring home Curt Flood's 1,000,000-to-1 shot.
First this morning, in number 7132, Curtis C. Flood against Kuhn and others.
When Goldberg got up in front of that courtroom that day, he totally froze. He started reciting the facts in almost rote fashion.
His batting averages were in 1963, 302, 1934, 311, 1964, 311.
He got lost, and then he started reciting the facts again. And Justice Brennan, who was a close friend of Goldberg, he just sort of like put his head down.
He really didn't behave properly before the court. He didn't answer their questions.
Mr. Justice, may I ask you? No. And I shall discuss that when I come to the labor exemption. I hope you're going to get to that. I will move fast.
I was embarrassed. I wanted to slink down under the table.
At the conclusion, he had wanted to say something more and was not allowed to, and that struck me as, oh my God.
Excuse me, your time is completely consumed.
It was something of a debacle.
Anyone who's a lawyer could have done a better job than Arthur Goldberg that day.
I think he minimized the effect of his case, and I think I came pretty close to maximizing ours.
Also today, the court heard oral arguments on a suit against baseball's reserve clause, a suit brought by former St. Louis Cardinal outfielder Curt Flood. Flood was not present.
I always got the impression when I looked at him that he'd been through a lot and was just kind of recuperating.
After leaving the Senators, Flood had washed ashore on the Spanish island of Majorca. Amongst a community of fellow wayward souls, he'd found, it seemed, just what he was looking for.
Nobody queried anybody about anything. We were living. What happened yesterday was gone.
He's a mystery man. He's totally isolated himself from the outside world.
Dad escaped. At this age, I can say that. You know, when I was 13, I couldn't.
In exile, Flood regained an existence. With financial help from a girlfriend, he bought a bar called the Rustic Inn, where he whiled away his days and nights as bartender, patron, and host rolled into one.
A lot of American ships came in. The sailors found out about him, and they used to flock in there when they were there. Curt Flood was a big fan of Muhammad Ali, and he had tapes of all his fights. So he used to play them, and all the Americans there, they seemed to love it. And Curt would be standing there with a smile on his face.
The Supreme Court today rejected a suit by ex-outfielder Curt Flood. The court ruled 5-3 that baseball, although clearly a business engaged in interstate commerce, has long been granted a special status with respect to antitrust legislation. The ruling said if that special status is to be removed, it should be done by Congress and not the court.
Curt, you're right. We screwed up twice, but we're not going to change it. We're going to leave it up to Congress, which has no chance of changing it. It's an embarrassing decision.
The court had become much more conservative and much more willing to keep this situation regarding antitrust that applied to all other professional sports, but not to baseball. It's crazy.
Yet Flood had lost by the narrowest of margins. Justice Lewis Powell, on Flood's side after an initial vote, withdrew from the case because he owned stock in Anheuser-Busch, a conflict of interest. The resulting 4-4 deadlock was broken only after Chief Justice Warren Burger switched his vote at the 11th hour.
Flood lost on quirks. And given the vote switching that went on, given that it was a really close case, a good oral argument, and Flood would have won the case.
In my mind, we were never going to win anyway. And it could now just check off another way of doing something about the reserve clause.
What's this going to do to Curt Flood?
Well, I guess Curt is going to have to consider where he goes and what he does on his own at this point.
Well, I telephoned him. He felt the color of his skin was a factor here. If the player had been a white player, he kept believing that it would have a different result. I told him I thought that was absurd.
Curt may not have been emotionally prepared for the decision.
In the history of man, there's no other profession except slavery.
And everything that happened after argued that he wasn't emotionally prepared.
It just seemed to me as though 1 week he was there and a few minutes later he was gone.
The dark brown shades of my skin.
The Spanish police closed down his bar, and he just disappears from Mallorca.
Only add color to my tears.
After 4 years in Spain, Flood soon resurfaced in the tiny neighboring country of Andorra. There, high in the Pyrenees Mountains, his life quickly spiraled downward.
Looking back over my false dreams that I once knew.
The police catch him trying to steal from an Andorran department store.
Is it because I'm black?
They break his left arm and throw him in jail.
Somebody tell me, what can I do? Will I survive or will I die?
By the time he goes to the Barcelona psychiatric hospital, the State Department gets word.
In this world of no pity, I was raised in the ghettos of the city. Yeah, oh Lord.
I sent the money for him to come home. When he came home, he didn't have anything except what he had in his arm. I think he had a dog and the clothes he had on, and that was about it.
Something is holding me back.
It was difficult getting the real deal about exactly what happened. He hardly admitted being in a psychiatric hospital. Curtis was the kind of person who, no bad news.
But Karen Brecker, who worked with Flood's sister at a local welfare agency, knew a desperate case when she saw one. She met Flood when he was living with his mother and began dating him soon after a dubious accident in which he'd fractured his skull following a drunken fall from his roof.
I think he was trying to kill himself. He was cataclysmically depressed. He said to me, "Get me out of here." So I said, okay.
A labor arbitrator handed down a ruling today that could shake the foundations of organized baseball. Pitchers Andy Messersmith of the Los Angeles Dodgers and Dave McNally of the Montreal Expos were declared free agents.
In the years since Flood had sued baseball, Marvin Miller and the union had forged forward in the battle for free agency. Not through the legal system as Flood had tried, but through collective bargaining, which among other things had won players the right to have an independent arbitrator decide their grievances. And in 1975, after Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally played a whole season without contracts, they, aided by Miller, filed a grievance claiming they were free agents.
From the very beginning, we always thought it was quite clear. The contract provided the club can renew the contract for 1 year. That's it.
And just as the union had hoped, an independent arbitrator released them from their contracts. Baseball's reserve system had been destroyed 6 years after Flood had hurled the first stone.
Flood's lawsuit changed the climate of public opinion about free agency. It raised the awareness that this system isn't fair.
It opened the door. Then there had to be some other people that had some guts too.
The Flood case, at the very least, gave impetus to getting impartial arbitration of grievances. And that, in turn, led to the Messersmith-McNally case.
The thoughtful players gave Curt Flood at least a modicum of credit.
But that provided nary a modicum of solace for Flood himself.
He's completely estranged from the game of baseball, and everything that he fought for, he's never going to see the benefit of any of it. It's now really hitting home.
What do you want to do now?
Well, I'm going to manage a Little League team, believe it or not. And that's really all I want to do.
He loved baseball. The proudest thing was his card that got him into the games for free.
Don't you want to get back into Major League Baseball?
Yes, but I don't think that Major League Baseball is ready for me.
How you doing?
Curt wants a job in baseball.
You remember me?
But he wants some measure of self-respect. And I also think he wants to not be the guy who sued baseball anymore. He wants to move on.
Letters were written to Los Angeles, San Francisco, even to the Bushes, saying, "Hi, how are you? I'm back in town. I'd love a job." There was a couple of responses. "Sorry, no positions available. Good luck."
When 20 people own an industry, it's very easy for them to keep me out of baseball.
You think that's happening?
Probably. Probably.
I remember him coming back. And I remember his struggle in Oakland, trying to reinvent himself.
Searching for a new identity, Flood received a lead in 1978 when his old benefactor, Sam Berkovich, bought the radio rights to Renegade owner Charlie Finley's Oakland A's.
He was very happy when we did give him the job. People thought it was a mistake, but it was our choice.
This is Bud Foster, along with Curt Flood.
Flood had returned to the game he loved. But once inside the ballpark, the man who'd been baseball's loudest critic found trouble summoning his voice.
He knew he wasn't doing very well, but he was trying to keep it going.
You could have gotten a strike call on that, Curt. It was that difference.
They'd ask him a question, and there'd be silence. He's counting clouds or doing something, but he's not broadcasting.
He was so fearful. He was more like the Curt Flood in the courtroom in 1970. But he was still really battling his demons with alcohol.
He sort of was like a 24/7 drinker, vodka drinker.
It was extraordinary to see somebody drinking that way, but there was no slurred speech or gaps in reasoning.
And he turned his back 3/4 of the infield, and he made a fine running catch.
For years, he'd had a drinking problem, even way back when he was playing baseball.
I think he was drinking before baseball. And he wasn't the only one in our family that had a drinking problem. My grandmother drank and spit tobacco.
But his drinking, as far as he was concerned, wasn't a problem. He never acknowledged that he couldn't function. He thought he could.
That is the end of the top half.
The radio gig was up after just one season. But around this time, Flood turned to another piece of his past in an effort to improve his present.
He thought that by resurrecting his painting, he could generate some income.
Sam Berkovich helped him start the business again. But the way he started it was by sending photographs down to an artist in Los Angeles. That artist was the one who was painting the portraits. It wasn't Curt Flood.
He would send the picture down. They would blow it up and paint over it. Send them back framed. Curtis would sign his name, and that was the deal.
It was a practice, according to Brecker, that didn't begin then, but a decade earlier, during the height of Flood's baseball career.
He wasn't ever painting. Curtis was really talented. He could draw, he definitely could, but he didn't have the ability to do oils. I was surprised when I first found out about this because I thought he had done that.
Curt said he didn't sleep, then he painted at night and on the road. But this was a guy who spent a lot of his nights partying and with women.
From what he did on the road, I would have never known he was an artist. He would have been painting in the room. No, he was out doing just what everybody else. Go to the bars, have a couple little drinks.
In my belief, my dad didn't have that type of character to be a fraud. Do you understand? That ain't in him. Why would you perpetrate a fraud? He had God-given artistic ability.
One of his business partners told me that Curt was unpacking these portraits finished, out of crates. Another person close to Curt guessed that Carl was painting some of these portraits.
He told me that he didn't do them. I think it started out and then it just grew. People wanted it, he could deliver it. It was like bigger than him. I'm famous for another reason, so I have to keep that going.
But between his drinking and a lack of demand for his work in the late 70s, he couldn't keep the business afloat. Flood was out of options. Cruel timing, considering the economic revolution he'd spawned had burst into full bloom.
He was happy for them. He was unhappy for himself. He thought all these guys would come out of the woodwork and support him.
There were years in which I would explain during spring training meetings the significance of the Flood case and talk about Curt. Sometimes you'd get a quiet clubhouse. Sometimes somebody would say, "Who did he play for?"
Are you bitter about the fact that the players have forgotten?
Do you think they really have forgotten?
What have they done for you?
Well, actually nothing.
I think the only thing he ever got, Mike Torres gave him the gold chain around his neck. Well, this is for what you've done. Thank you. We all owe you a lot. And he felt they did owe him a lot.
Can anything be done for him in a financial way by the Players Association?
No, I'm afraid not, Howard. The Players Association is a labor organization under the law. The way it expends its funds is severely limited.
I think the biggest loss for him, forget the baseball, was his kids. And he felt guilty about dropping out of their lives for all those years. He thought he was a failure as a father.
The reason I wrote about him was that I was and am fascinated by the people who stand up. I admire them greatly because they're the people who buy the rest of us a little freedom.
But the Curt Flood writer Richard Reeves found in Oakland was, despite the spirit of his lawsuit, far from free himself.
More than once, he broke down and cried and kept saying to me, please don't do this. I don't want to go through all this again. He saw himself as a victim. I saw him as a hero. He saw himself as a victim.
Well, he was a victim, no doubt. He was a victim of a poor decision. He felt bad that he couldn't support his children. He felt bad that he was an alcoholic. He felt bad about what he had done to his life.
I mean, being with this man at that time was like poking your finger in an open wound. He was a broken man and bleeding. He never told a story about the good years. In some way, his unhinging had destroyed those years.
About the only thing Flood had left to turn to was what he'd spent nearly a decade trying to escape: his lawsuit against the game of baseball.
I think it was his entire life. It was going to be the first line of his obituary. And he couldn't take it, but he couldn't let it go either.
Now I have an identity. Now I have to make the most of that identity. I have to do these interviews, repeat this story. You know, I do it all again. There wasn't anything else. That's what he wanted to be remembered for.
Here's the question you get asked most, and I'm going to ask it again. If you had known what you were about to go through, would you have gone ahead with that case?
I think so. It is, in retrospect, very difficult now to remember. Over the years, I've forgotten a little bit, but I think that I would have.
By the mid-'80s, alcohol had dulled Curt Flood's recall, but his baseball pension had at least begun to improve his finances. He left Karen Brecker, but it wasn't long before Flood traded his independence in Oakland for a lost piece of his ever-fading past.
Taking him to the airport to go to spring training for the Senators was the last time I saw him. So fast forward to 1985. He was drinking. And the more he came down, the more I saw there seems to be too much of the drinking.
In terms of his recovery, Judy put her foot down.
He went into a sobriety situation. I told him we were not getting married until he was sober, completely sober.
My dad knew what it was to be addicted to a substance. And he also knew what it was to put that substance out of your life. When he did, the things that were missing in his life were given back.
I think marrying Judy was when he finally sort of found happiness again.
He found a second shot at fatherhood, too, with Pace's 2 young daughters. Flood's new life in Los Angeles also allowed him to begin making things right with his own.
Once he started showing up, once he started giving, it told me that he was sorry, that he did realize there was an absence and damages that he caused. That time in Los Angeles, he truly was my father. He had his footing again and was seeking a life.
First on Sports Look, Curt Flood. In an irony of cosmic proportions, Curt Flood has become commissioner of a baseball league.
Indeed.
How did that happen?
Well, it's a very long story.
Sober after so many years, Flood also found a path of re-entry into the baseball world. He took a job as commissioner of the fledgling Senior Professional Baseball League and began reconnecting on the field with his pals from the glory days.
To see him at an old-timers game, bannering with Bob Gibson and having fun, to see that was wonderful.
It was like old times. I remember playing over in Esterville, Iowa. That's the place where they have the Field of Dreams. And they had this guy who pitched for that team in the movie. And he ended up hitting Curt right in the middle of the back. Umpire told him to take his base, and he said, no. Stood there and hit. And the next pitch he hit a home run.
There's a drive, deep left.
He would always say, don't try to make my life a Greek tragedy. I'm living happily ever after.
For baseball's forgotten man was starting to get acclaim for the act which had shaped his odyssey.
The NAACP is proud to present its first Jackie Robinson Sports Award to Mr. Curt Flood.
But it was when the players went on strike in 1994 that Flood received the audience he craved the most.
I thought it was very important for the player leadership at the time to talk with Curt. Thought it would be helpful in the negotiations to be stronger, perhaps.
And so it was, nearly 25 years to the day, after addressing a group of skeptical player reps in Puerto Rico, that Curt Flood finally spoke to them again.
When he came in, he got a standing ovation. And that's all he wanted.
When he began to tell me about that experience, he began to cry. I said, you didn't really believe that they loved you that much, did you? He says, no, I didn't believe that they knew me. Curt really felt that I got it together now. Baseball had embraced him again. It seems like in life, sometimes you're given a space where you are going to be happy for a while. But the person that's given that space knows that it's not going to last. We were in Dallas at the All-Star game. The second day there, he was hacking, coughing. And he says, I just had this real sore throat. I can't seem to kick it.
When we got back into LA, we went to a doctor at UCLA. They came back that afternoon and said it was cancer.
He said, I guess the drinking and the smoking finally caught up with me. Then he said, I'm going into the hospital to have an operation. It was an operation to remove his larynx, his esophagus.
My baseball career is just starting.
Curt Flood's voice.
I just couldn't imagine losing this case.
Some of the guys that are making a lot of money right now know exactly why.
Over the course of his life, it turns eloquent.
Prejudice is not only confined to the southern part of our United States.
Defiant.
A well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave.
And confounding.
People say, why you? I asked the same question. Why was it me?
Had been silenced. Small comfort, perhaps, was the response of the group who'd benefited from his determined stand decades before.
It was as if they got in bed with him and took his hand and said, don't worry about anything. Richard Moss stepped up to the plate.
I helped convince the union to pay for his medical expenses because his insurance coverage had lapsed.
When Curt heard that, tears came to his eyes because he felt that they did appreciate what he had done. But it was sad that it was at the end of his life before they really showed appreciation to what he had given up.
It was his birthday. We had gone up to the hospital. He was very sick, and he knew it. And he tried to be there for us, if you can imagine. And 2 days later, he was gone. Just like that.
Baseball didn't change Curt Flood. Curt Flood changed baseball.
What a ball player he was. And one of the best friends that you could have.
Don't cry for long.
Curtis had a really hard life. He was a tormented soul, I think. I mean, you can't say a bad word about him. So he didn't paint the paintings, who cares? He was really a good guy.
Curt is the winner. The court's lost. Curt won. Let him rest. Fought the good fight.
My feelings about my father are not so much that he is my father, but a combination of how everybody feels about him. I lived in this dual understanding all my life. I still do. I'm a lot more at peace with it because whatever he lacked as a father, his legacy makes up for it.
I'd like to note the Curt Flood Act, which is the baseball antitrust bill named after Curt Flood, who died just a day or so ago.
Just 59 when he died, Curtis Charles Flood lived a life filled with no shortage of identities. But in the years since his death, he finally has settled into the one he yearned for most.
Curt Flood, he sacrificed his whole career.
He's the reason we had free agency.
Exactly.
It's a fitting legacy, even if, as Flood's life suggests, the truth is a bit more complicated.
People think Curt Flood was the guy that broke the reserve system. Technically, that's not so.
I don't see him as being fundamentally different from George Toolson or other people that took a shot at baseball's reserve system. They all lost, but the others, there was no mechanism to keep the issue alive. By the time Curt Flood comes along, the Players Association already has this front and center in their sights.
But Curt Flood permits you to see it as a moral issue. And it's important for you to see it as a moral issue. He did that for you in a way that Messersmith, McNally, and all those early free agents would not have done it for you.
He is the one that implicated, you don't have a right to own me forever. Curt started all of this. So anybody that says otherwise, I would say quit it.
I mean, what was Lincoln really like? It doesn't matter. What he did is what matters. You're dealing with the nature of heroism. The fact that any one of us might do this gives us a little more power when we face the man or the establishment. And the guys who threw away their lives to do that, we owe a great deal to.
Do you feel you have a place in baseball history? And if so, is it important to you?
It is important to me. As important as doing what I did was. I don't think I will be forgotten very soon because I was one of the first to stand up and say, hey, at one point in your life, you ought to be able to control your career. And that's what it was all about.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports.